All right, let's dive into a cultural puzzle that is just fascinating. How did a few classic children's stories from the West become, of all things, foundational myths for modern Japan? Yeah, we're talking about tales that aren't just popular over there, they are woven into the very fabric of the national identity. So let's get into it. And really, it all starts with this one question. This is Anne Shirley, from the Canadian novel Anne of Green Gables. Now, in most of the world, she's a well-loved character from a classic book. But in Japan, she is an absolute icon, a cultural phenomenon on a whole other level. So, why? How on earth did this story, from a tiny island in Canada, find such a deep, profound home halfway across the world?
I mean, the scale of her popularity there is just staggering. Her story was turned into a legendary must-watch anime series. Prince Edward Island, where the book is set, is a major tourist destination, a mecca for Japanese fans. But even more than that, Anne herself became this powerful symbol of independence, inspiring whole generations of Japanese women. So yeah, this is clearly not just some passing fad. It's a deep, lasting connection, and we're going to figure out exactly why.
To solve this mystery, we have to go back in time, all the way back to the end of World War II. Japan was a nation in ruins, and not just physically, but ideologically. And this moment of crisis, it created the perfect conditions for a complete cultural rewrite. So from 1945 to 1952, Japan was under Allied occupation, led by the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, or SCAP for short. And their mission wasn't just to rebuild cities. Oh no, it was to completely remake Japanese society from the ground up, to demilitarize and democratize an entire nation. And what was their number one tool for this massive job? Education. To do this, SCAP put this radical policy into place called Sumi Nori Kyokusho. It literally means blackening over textbooks. Students were actually told to take their school books and a pot of ink and physically black out any passages that promoted nationalism, militarism, or total obedience to the emperor. I mean, just imagine being a kid and being told to literally erase the foundations of your country's story.
This created a huge ideological vacuum. An entire generation was suddenly left without a moral compass. So SCAP deliberately filled that void. They handpicked a list of Western books that they believed would promote democratic values, stories about individual freedom, human rights, and personal grit. This was not about entertainment. This was a targeted, nationwide re-education program.
But look, these changes weren't just happening at the national level, in schools and government. They struck right at the very heart of Japanese society, the family. A tradition that had stood for centuries was about to be completely dismantled, creating this deep psychological need for new kinds of stories. For centuries, Japanese society was built around what's called the E system. This was this rigid patriarchal structure where the family unit was everything, and the individual, well, not so much. Your life was all about duty. The head of the house had absolute authority, and only the eldest son could inherit anything. Then, 1947 happens, the new constitution drops, and with the stroke of a pen, this entire system is legally abolished. Just gone.
You really can't overstate how huge this was. The new civil code replaced that old patriarchal duty with the ideal of mutual affection. It swapped eldest son inheritance with equal rights for every child. It threw out arranged marriages for marriages based on love and mutual agreement. This was a social earthquake, and it left people scrambling, looking for new role models for what a family could even look like.
And this is where the orphan protagonist becomes so important. Think about it. Anne Shirley, Heidi, Sarah Crew from A Little Princess. These are all stories about kids finding a found family. A family built not on blood and duty, but on love, choice, and acceptance. For a nation that felt collectively orphaned from its own past and its traditions, these stories offered a powerful and incredibly hopeful blueprint for the future.
But okay, political and social need, that can only get you so far. For these stories to really take root and become part of the culture, there had to be something else going on. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because these foreign stories felt, in a very strange way, incredibly Japanese.
To understand this, let's look at another book, A Dog of Flanders. In its home country of Belgium, this story is basically unknown. No one's heard of it. But in Japan, it is a heartbreaking classic that every single child knows, mostly thanks to its famous anime adaptation. Now, the story is about an orphan boy and his dog who freeze to death in a cathedral. It's a tragic ending. So why the massive difference in popularity?
The answer lies in this one beautiful concept, mono no aware.
It's a cornerstone of the Japanese aesthetic, and it roughly translates to the pathos of things. It's this deep appreciation for the transient, fleeting nature of life and the gentle sadness that comes with it. Think of cherry blossoms. They're so stunning because they don't last. It's an on-worldview that finds beauty not in overcoming tragedy, but in the dignified acceptance of it. So for a Western audience, the end of A Dog of Flanders is a failure. For a Japanese audience, it's a beautiful, poignant, and complete expression of Mononoke Ware.
And once you start looking, you see this aesthetic match everywhere. The focus on the inner emotional lives of the characters, like all of Anne Shirley's feelings, that resonated with Japan's own long tradition of emotion-focused storytelling. The book's loving, detailed descriptions of nature and the changing seasons felt completely familiar to a literary culture that uses seasonal markers, or kigo, and poetry like haiku. Even the whole Victorian charm, the puff sleeves, the tea parties, it fit perfectly with Japan's emerging post-war culture of kawaii, or cuteness.
So we have the need, and we have this hidden aesthetic match. But these books still needed a bridge to connect with the Japanese public. They needed masterful translators and adapters, which you might call cultural alchemists, who could take this foreign material and make it feel truly, completely Japanese.
And first up was the translator, Hanako Muraoka. When she published Akagi no An, or Red-Haired Anne, in 1952, she made a brilliant choice. She translated Anne's passionate, very outspoken dialogue into a formal, refined, almost classical style of Japanese. This was genius. It framed Anne's radical independence within the familiar ideal of the perfect, graceful Japanese woman, the Yamato Nadeshiko. She made a totally modern hero feel timeless and traditional.
And then came television. And with it, the world masterpiece theater. This was a legendary anime series that for decades adapted a new Western classic every single year. It became a national institution. It was essential viewing for generations of Japanese kids and their parents.
And their formula was simple, but man was it effective. They chose stories that emphasized grit, perseverance, and the importance of family, all lessons the war generation was desperate to pass on. They adapted them with beautiful, high-quality animation, and in doing so, they created a shared cultural experience that literally everyone in the country knew and loved.
And just get a load of the talent involved here. Before they went on to found the world-famous Studio Ghibli, animation legends Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki were cutting their teeth on this very series, directing classics like Heidi, Girl of the Alps, and Anne of Green Gables. This wasn't just some kids' TV show, it was the training ground for some of the greatest animators in history.
So, when you put it all together, you can see that the incredible popularity of these stories wasn't an accident. Not at all. It was the result of a perfect cultural storm, where all these different forces just happened to converge at exactly the right moment.
So let's just recap that recipe one more time. First, you have a top-down political need for stories that could teach democratic values. Second, a huge social need for new models of family based on love, not duty. Third, a surprising and deep aesthetic connection that made these foreign stories feel strangely familiar. And finally, you have brilliant translators and animators who turn these books into a shared national memory for everyone.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought. This isn't just a story about Japan. Every culture adopts and adapts stories from other places, making them their own for reasons that are often hidden deep in their history. So it makes you wonder, what stories from other places have become essential to who you are, and what deep need are they fulfilling? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.